Good afternoon. Students, faculty, colleagues, and friends, and distinguished guests, welcome to our event this evening. My name is Jay Rosen. I'm the Director of the International Program in Conflict Resolution and Mediation. This afternoon, we're pleased to offer our second colloquium with representatives of the multinational peacekeeping forces here in the region. For those of you who are new to hearing about our program, the International Program in Conflict Resolution and Mediation is an interdisciplinary one-year graduate degree program taught here at the Tel Aviv University, which aims to gives its students the academic and practical skills needed for conflict resolution in the international arena. You can certainly ask many of our students how their experiences so far and their ambitions. Our students are coming from around the world, coming from a wide variety of backgrounds and interests in the field of conflict resolution, as well as our faculty come with their own expertise in various aspects of conflict resolution from a variety of disciplines. In addition to our academic studies, we bring distinguished guests at least once a week to our classroom to enable our students to hear from professionals out in the field who are working in conflict resolution, mediation, consensus building, facilitation, to hear more, some insight from the field, specifically in fields that are maybe covered briefly in our courses but otherwise aren't covered in depth, and also providing our students an opportunity for professional networking inside the classroom as part of their classroom experience. Owing to not just our students' interest in the field of peacekeeping and its relevance to our program studies, but also with the ongoing developments in our region, and more particularly with the ongoing developments with Syria's civil war and its encroachment both on Israel's borders and and the involvement of UN peacekeeping forces on the Golan Heights. This event, again, it's the second that we've held here, is not only relevant to our program but definitely timely. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our academic chair, Professor Nitza Nachmias, who will give a little more introduction on what is peacekeeping and introduce our distinguished guests this evening.
Thank you very much, Jay. Dear guests, honorable speakers, Brigadier General Delro Laval, the commander of the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, comes to us from France originally, Colonel Patrick Couchat, Deputy Force Commander of United Nations Truth Supervision Organization in Jerusalem, and he is originally from Switzerland. I'll introduce them later. Colleagues, students, and guests. Israel and the United Nations have very complex and ambivalent relationships. The United Nations passed the partition resolution that recognized and acknowledged the right of the Jewish people to have a state, and this resolution enabled the creation of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. But on the other hand, the United Nations passed many controversial resolutions criticizing Israel's policies, resolutions that Israel considers to be very biased. However, on one issue, Israel and the United Nations agree. They are in full agreement. Both Israel and the United Nations acknowledge the important role that UN peacekeeping missions play in the Israeli-Arab conflict and their important contribution to keeping our borders safe, stable, and with lower violence or non-violent at all. Before I give the floor to our distinguished guests, I would like to bring to your attention some basic facts about the concept of peacekeeping and what peacekeeping is all about. When we talk about peacekeeping, we get very, very confused. We are talking about military, we are talking about peacekeeping. Isn't it a contradiction in terms? Soldiers for peace. Are you a soldier? Are you a peaceful person? Soldiers for peace. We have the concept of coercive diplomacy, which also sounds like a contradiction in terms. Humanitarian military intervention. How can a military intervention be considered humanitarian? I'm challenging you. Peace enforcement. How can peace enforcement be something that is not violent? Are peacekeeping missions military missions? Are they humanitarian missions? Are they diplomatic missions? Well, in short answer, all of the above. How do I... Okay. Peacekeeping was not a concept that was created when the United Nations was created. It is not in the Charter, and it is basically what we said, all of the above. Peacekeeping was involved in a military operation. 20,000 people, 20,000 soldiers, peacekeepers, were actually fighting in the civil war in Congo in the 60s. But on the other hand, peacekeeping was very peaceful and non-violent in the separation and finding separation between the Turks and the Greek community in Cyprus. We know about UNIFIL, Israeli-Egypt ceasefire. We also know of successful and unsuccessful peacekeeping missions. The unsuccessful known one is Rwanda, Somalia, Congo. But there were many successful missions, and there is no doubt that basically, by and large, peacekeeping is a concept that is deemed very important and very successful and in very great need in all international conflicts. We cannot think of any international conflict today in the world where peacekeeping force will not be required, where peacekeeping force or mission will not be asked to help. UNTSO was the first ever United Nations mission to be created in 1948. 30 years passed between the creation of UNIFIL. Exactly 30 years, 1978, UNIFIL was established. Between 1948 and today, 67 peacekeeping missions were deployed. Over 120 countries contribute soldiers. Each mission is established by the Security Council. It has to be a Security Council resolution under Chapter 7, and also the sides where peacekeeping mission is deployed have to accept the force. It is very interesting to note that Israel never accepted any U.S. peacekeeping mission on its territory. Don't ask me why. I still cannot understand why. A little bit about bureaucracy and organization. Who is the United Nations Secretary of Defense? Who is in charge of all the peacekeeping missions in the world? Actually, the Secretary General of the United Nations is kind of the Minister of Defense of the world. And who is the head of the forces? The military chairman, Ramatkal, is the United Nations head of the Department of Peacekeeping. Now, the whole peacekeeping headquarters is in New York, at the headquarters of the United Nations. In 2003, United Nations operated 14 missions. Each mission is divided to battalion. I'll give you the breakdown of the UNIFIL force. The UNIFIL force includes battalions from, I'm not going to read the whole list, you can read it, Armenia, Australia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Belgium, Brazil. Am I right?
not all of them are the battalion size, but you're right, in terms of countries involved. Yes.
All these countries are part of UNIFIL. What are the functions and duties of peacekeeping? Since 1948, when peacekeeping regime has evolved, operations range from observation and monitoring of peace agreements, observation and monitoring of ceasefire treaties, keep and maintain ceasefire among rival parties, provide humanitarian assistance. Yes, peacekeeping missions provide humanitarian assistance. I believe that we will hear a little bit more about it later. United Nations also send missions to supervise elections, to prevent conflicts that can erupt during elections like happened in Kenya last year. We have to remember Dag Hammarskjöld, and I always say in my classes, whoever can spell Hammarskjöld with no spelling mistake gets an A without a final. Dag Hammarskjöld was the second Secretary General, and he tried to make some sense in the concept of peacekeeping, and he introduced the principles that guide peacekeeping operations. First of all, consent of the parties. Of course, we know that sometimes United Nations send missions to areas where not all parties consented, but in principle, we try to have the consent of the parties. The mission has to follow impartiality, non-use of force except in self-defense, commitment of the parties to the peace process. History, a little bit of history of peacekeeping in the Israeli-Arab conflict. As we said, 1948, the first introduction of United Nations mission. UNTSO supervises all areas, Golan Heights, Syria, Lebanon, Jerusalem, and Egypt. We will hear later what UNTSO is doing, a very important supervision job. 1956, we remember the 1956 Suez Crisis. Following the Suez Crisis, the United Nations created United Nations Emergency Force 1, UNIF-1, that Nasser later kicked out in 1967. This was one of the reasons that we believed that Nasser is going to attack Israel, because he kicked out UNIF-1. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War, UNIF-2 was created. Also, following the Yom Kippur War, Andof in the Golan Heights was created. I want to remind you that the UN missions are peacekeeping missions, but they suffer fatalities, and they are in the line of fire many times. Andof suffered 44 casualties. UNIFIL until today, I don't know if I'm correct, UNIFIL until today in Lebanon suffered 296 fatalities. A little bit about the size of UN peacekeeping. Total, under the banner of UN peacekeeping, we have 92,936 personnel. They are divided into troops, police, military observers, civilian, and also volunteers. And the last slide that I'm going to show you is, of course, money. Where is the money? Where is the money coming from? And this is very interesting. The budget of UN peacekeeping for 2013, between June 12 and June 13, the budget is $7.033 billion. So it's a sizable budget. The United States contributes 27.14% of the budget. Now, we have to remember that the United States does not participate in UN peacekeeping missions. This was an agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. there was an agreement that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union will participate in peacekeeping missions, not to introduce the Cold War into United Nations work and United Nations missions. So while the United States does not participate in peacekeeping missions, it nonetheless contributes the most to the budget. Then we have Japan, UK, Germany, France. It is interesting that Italy, Spain, France, countries that suffer economic hardships still contribute to UN peacekeeping. Now, my question for you students for tomorrow, who is missing from this list? And we all know it. Okay. Who is missing from the contributors? Now, it's time for me to introduce our distinguished guests and speakers. And we will start with UNTSO, and of course I'll answer any questions that you might have later. Colonel Patrick Gauchat from Switzerland. He is Deputy Chief of Mission, and he lives in Jerusalem. UNTSO people live in Jerusalem, so they help the economy of Jerusalem. You contribute to the economy, but maybe because of you the rent is so high. This is Colonel Gauchat's second tour in Jerusalem, so you like us. He was first here for 2 years between 2000 and 2001. He returned to UNTSO for a second time in 2011, and he will be with us until the end of the year. Colonel Gauchat is a civil engineer by profession and a graduate of the Swiss Military Academy. He asked and got special training as a mountain infantry officer. Do you ski?
Yes.
Great, I love skiing. It's my favorite sport. He served in some of the world's most dangerous places, no skiing there. Congo, South Korea, and his second tour here. I almost forgot. Colonel Gauchat speaks 6 languages: French, German, Swiss German, English, and Spanish. Thank you, Colonel Gauchat. The floor is yours.